everyone can take our seats, it's time for our closing keynote, Speed and Scale, a conversation with John Doerr, who is the author of this fantastic book. John tonight will be interviewed by our very own conference co-host, Jamie Leigh of Cooley. So I will bring Jamie out, and we'll bring John up on the screen live there. Hi, John. Okay, Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
It's really wonderful to be here with everybody. Thank you for spending Friday afternoon. John, no pressure, but the only thing standing between you and I and happy hour is a short discussion about the end of the world. So thank you for being a part of that. In case you haven't seen it yet, this is John's new book. For those of you who are here with us in person, you have a copy in your takeaway bag. I encourage you to read it. It is not light or fluffy, but it is very important. And I'm hopeful that our discussion today will prime some of the way that we think about the way we interact in the world on a go-forward basis. So thank you and welcome, John.
Thank you for having me here. This is a forum about governance and leadership, so it's exactly the audience that I am hoping to reach. With this action plan to solve the climate crisis now.
So I will quote liberally and loosely from your book, so give me a little bit of indulgence with the way that I take the audience through something that is very, very deep and disciplined and brave in 30 minutes. But I wonder if you could start for us with the very poignant start to your book, with respect to the way this kicked off for you in a discussion with your daughter.
This all started 15 years ago. You remember Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth. I went to see that with some friends and family, and I would describe my then 15-year-old daughter, Mary Doerr, as an inconvenient youth, because when we had our dinner conversation, she said to me, "Dad, I'm scared and I'm angry. Your generation created this problem. You better fix it." And I was at a loss for words. I did not know what to say then. But I know this now. We are on the verge of catastrophic, irreversible climate crisis. And the evidence is all around us. Devastating hurricanes and floods, wildfires, unprecedented in California, heat waves and droughts. So this is an existential crisis. And how are we going to answer Mary's question? How are we going to solve it? Here's the hard reality that I hope comes through in this book, in a mix of pragmatism, some optimism, and a lot of hope. What we are doing today is not enough. It's not nearly enough. And so COP convened this past 2 weeks. It closed in Glasgow with an extension till tomorrow and maybe the next day. And what COP, the world's leaders, are planning to do is not enough. More than anything else, the book argues what we need is a clear course of action. And we need it now. And so Speed and Scale, the title of the book, is also the title of a plan. You can get this plan, the infographic, for free now at speedandscale.com. And it will show us a way. It's not going to be easy, but if we succeed at this, we're going to save the planet and create the economic opportunity of our lifetime. The opportunity for health, for equity, for prosperity, as we move from a fossil fuel burning economy to a clean energy economy.
One of the things I was struck with in the way that you write the book, certainly the content, but also the methodology, is the importance for you of a plan that is both simple. I love your wartime napkin analogy, but also measurable. Can you give us a sensation for what simple means and measurable means in the way that we look at climate change and climate action?
Sure. Maybe I'll tell you what the 6 great goals are to illustrate the example. But I would also say that this way of building plans is something that I learned from Andy Grove at Intel, a mentor of mine and many others. And he calls this system objectives and key results. But rather than talk about that, I'd love to return to it. Let me just tell you that there are 6 great goals. And how can I do it right here? There's really only 3 numbers to remember about the climate crisis. That's 59, net zero, in 2050. We're putting 59 gigatons of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere every year as if it's some kind of free, open sewer. And we've got to drive that number to 0 by 2050, where the science tells us the odds are quite high. Nothing's certain here, but the odds are very high. We'll have an inhabitable planet with warming greater than 2 degrees Celsius. So 59 gigatons to 0. What the plan says is we can break that down into 6 great goals. The first of which is to electrify transportation. And that means we'll stop powering our vehicles with gas and diesel, but rather use batteries. The second goal is to decarbonize the grid. That's the biggest opportunity. And that's by generating our electricity from wind and solar. The third opportunity is to fix our food systems. And that means eating less beef and dairy, but not cutting them out altogether. It means reducing food waste, which is 30% around the planet on average. Let's get that down to 10%. And then finally, let's improve our agricultural processes to use fertilizer more precisely, more accurately. If we do those 3 things, we'll take 7 gigatons out of the system. The next 3 are to protect nature, to set aside millions of acres, some 30% of the ocean and the forest lands, stop deforesting, clean up our industry, that is how we make cement and concrete. Together, those 2 are about 6 gigatons. And after we've done those 5, it turns out there's going to remain some emissions from rogue states or difficult to solve problems, maybe like air travel, that will require us to remove carbon that's already in the atmosphere. Those can be by natural means or mechanical means. Planting more trees would fall into this category. So would be making mechanical trees, they might call it, direct air capture. We have to do all 6 of these things at once. Each one of them is a tall order, and we've got to do them fast. We've got to get it all done by 2050 and half done by 2030. So the second part of this plan describes 4 accelerants, 4 ways we can more confidently go quickly. And in many ways, these are the hardest parts of the plan. Winning the politics and therefore winning the right policies, leveraging movements, not just for more protests, but to turn them into action. And I'm talking about everything from impassioned teenagers to the movement among investors that Larry Fink is leading at BlackRock. He's got $150 trillion of investor capital committed to be aligned around net zero. It's a remarkable movement. I describe Walmart, what they're doing, as a movement, not just a business. 2 more. We've got to innovate, because no matter how important it is for us to deploy more wind, more solar now, we don't have all the technologies we need to get us to net zero. And so we've got to increase investment and innovate like crazy. The final force here is to invest. Turns out we do have enough money. We just got to direct it away from dirty fossil fuels to clean energy across all segments of the world's economy. You know, you mentioned the napkin. There was a point in World War II where it looked pretty grim, and FDR wrote on a napkin the 5 things that we needed to do to win the World War. He did this for his commanding general. That napkin inspired us to come up with the 6 things we've got to do. Electrify transportation, decarbonize the grid, fix our food systems, protect nature, clean up industry, and remove the carbon. And then do it with these 4 accelerants. Now, those are great goals. If you'll permit me one more point. The difference between goals and a plan is that for each of these objectives, we have 3 to 5 what are called key results. And these are specific, time-bound, highly measurable, done, not done ways of tracking our progress, holding people accountable, aligning our efforts, getting transparency. It's something that Andy Grove invented at Intel Company, because I'm an alumnus or a refugee from the semiconductor industry. To make computer chips right, you've got to get tens of thousands of lines, a millionth of a meter, a micron wide, exactly right, or nothing works at all. So Andy came up with this very rigorous but simple, powerful system for planning. And I think that's one of the things that sets the book apart, that we've taken the goals and broken them down into key results, some of them for 2040, some of them for next year. If we achieve all 55 of these key results, we've got a path to a habitable planet, to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're not going to achieve them all. Each of them is nearly impossible to do. We'll fail on some and substitute some others. And I'm not here to tell you this is the only plan. I won't even say it's the best plan, but it is a plan. And on one piece of paper, it shows you the whole big picture. And it takes a lot of people who care about climate and don't know what to do, or who are scared and want to see a path. And it gives them some comfort. And importantly, it gives us a way forward.
I love that color-coded chart. Can we go to the 10th item on it? Because a lot of us in this room here spend a lot of time with dollar signs and dollars. You have a quote in your book that says, fundamental changes don't happen because they're virtuous. They happen because they make economic sense. Can you take us from all of your experience as an investor and an advisor in helping us bridge the gap to help people understand that there is financial return available in some of these technologies, in these leaders, in this innovation path? How do we, even for the most cynical of us, catch on to there may be something in this for us other than just the virtuous mindset?
Other than just saving the planet?
Saving the planet.
Sure. We need a lot more of 5 kinds of investment. And I'll talk about the returns that I think come from each. But there are global subsidies right now for clean energy work that are around $100 billion. And this plan calls for those to grow to $600 billion. Government subsidies and support for clean energy. Principally in the US, those would come from the reconciliation bill. There's government research and development budget. Turns out the US spends around $6 billion a year on clean energy research. Americans spend more than that on potato chips every year. So the plan calls for that number to double globally and go up by 4 times in the US to match the R&D budget of the NIH. You might be particularly interested, certainly I was, in venture capital funding, investing for profit in the great new economic opportunity of a clean energy economy. And the estimate is that this year, venture investment in clean energy development and early deployment is going to be around $30 billion. That's up really substantially from when I started in 2006. In fact, there's a graph in the book that shows it was 3 billion, there was a brief blip, and then around 2008, it cratered. And a lot of people lost confidence. The press even wrote stories that said that Kleiner Perkins was going to go out of business. I'll never forget a cover story from Fortune, something about me really shedding some tears. 2 weeks later, Beyond Meat went public, and our portfolio of $1 billion of investments, I want to be very clear, is today worth $3 billion. And there's a lot more venture capital pouring into the field. I think we're going to be okay on achieving that objective. I'll return to some of the lessons if you want. But just to sum this out, The remaining forms of financing, investing that we need are project financing. We need that to go from about $300 billion a year to $1 trillion per year. And philanthropic investing, which has been really neglected, we call for that to go from 10 billion to 30 billion. The great thing about philanthropic investing, whether it's in advocacy or in driving the green premium down for technically difficult projects, is that can take on risks that no other institution needs to be responsible for. And while Bill Gates is the world's greatest philanthropist, the alpha funder of philanthropic change is Jeff Bezos. And all this action has happened just in the last year. Jeff committed $10 billion over a decade or less to climate. He's already given $3 billion of that away. He hired a brilliant leader. And so lots of family offices, lots of individuals are saying, I want to know how to be more effective at climate philanthropy. Now, do you want to go into what it takes to build a climate business successfully? Or I want to be responsive to your questions.
Well, while we're on the topic of money, before we get to the building, could you also talk to us about how realistic it is to stop spending dirty money? Because I was particularly interested in your work in the ways that you are very honest about how difficult it has been to sort of learn from the lessons of early clean tech investing. We remember that fashionable bubble there for a couple of years. And at least in my mind, we spend a lot of time talking about ESG and the way that that impacts our boardrooms and the kinds of discussions we're having from a legal perspective, if boards are doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. But you spend a lot of time giving us detailed practical ideas and action plans with respect to the way that we spend the money. So can you, before you tell us about how to build a good business, can you tell us how to stop spending money on dirty things?
Yes, and for that we've got to rely on our accelerants. In general, the policymakers are lagging behind action from citizens, from impassioned youth, from the private sector. Although I will not note that in the COP proceedings, one of the actions they're asking be endorsed is that ineffective subsidies for fossil fuels be ended by 2030. Now, the catchword there is ineffective. At one point, the language said all subsidies for fossil fuels will be eliminated. And frankly, there's plainly political reasons why the United States can't sign on to that. There's a crucial vote in our 50-50 divided Senate that we need for our 550 trillion, no, it's $1 billion per year reconciliation bill. But I digress. I think the important thing to be clear about is the estimates are that it will cost $4 trillion a year for 20 years to fund the transition to the new clean energy economy. That's the cars and the batteries and the windmills and the solar panels and so forth. And my conviction, the numbers are making it very clear, is that the cost of the dirty economy is estimated at around 10 trillion a year. You say, John, 10 trillion a year. I mean, even by US government standards, that's a big money, big number. Is that really true? Well, look at the devastation that's happened just this very year. In China, the flood damage alone is estimated to be right around $30 billion. In Europe, that number is $35 billion. In the US, Hurricane Ida was $94 billion. 20% of deaths in the US are premature due to carbon pollution. And so I have to ask the question, how much devastation are we going to have to experience before it becomes clear that it's cheaper to save this planet than it is to ruin it? The money is there. We need to stop the subsidies of fossil fuels and, and direct that money to clean energy deployment practices and services. I think the US has a particular obligation here as the all-time alpha emitter. We've put out twice as much carbon pollution as we've unknowingly uh, used fire to enrich our lives. Fire burning fossil fuels, burning carbon-based fuels. What's, I think, incumbent as the alpha emitter is we've got to lead the way. We've got to show the world we're not the biggest emitter now. China is. It's twice as large as the US is. But we must show the world that we can get to a net zero economy so that they know it can be done. And in doing that, we can drive down the costs so that India can afford broadly to adopt electric vehicles, as an example. I think our responsibilities go beyond that. The US, China, and Europe need to fund the transition in the developing world to this new clean energy economy. Finally, I think there's an all-important matter of equity here, and that is that those who are going to suffer the most from this crisis have done the least to cause it and are least able to deal with it. So we have an obligation, and some of the key results I'm proudest of here are to get the world to achieve equity in education, health, and economic opportunity and jobs. And we have very measurable, very bold key results here. And that is a lot of the conversation that's going on now at the COP conference. COP is not presenting us a plan to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The pledges of the world are not enough, even if we were on track to achieve those pledges. So this is, the UN report said, a red alert. It's a crisis.
So one of the pieces or the instruments you use in many pieces in the book, for those of you feeling a little daunted about cracking it, there are beautiful vignettes that you use throughout the book of individual stories and individual voices that are peppered through the book to show what innovators really look like, or what action planners and players really do in real life. I was curious to know two things. First, what's the power of the storytelling for you in those vignettes? And do you have a favorite? Because I definitely have a favorite, and I would like to know if you do too.
Oh, I want to know what your favorite is. Tell me what it is.
On Meat is my favorite.
Yes. Yes. Ethan, tall, lanky Midwesterner who decides he wants to create plant-based McDonald's, mortgages his home, struggles with his career, honestly, to find purpose and passion. That's a great story. And the stories are a crucial part of the book. I interviewed 100 people for the book and selected about a third of those to create 35 memorable stories. One of my favorites is Lynn Jurek, who talks about Sunrun and what it was like to build the largest domestic installer of solar panels, residential solar, fighting with utilities and struggling to raise money and raising a family, having a baby in the midst of an IPO. I mean, I think the most poignant is with Ryan Popple, who is especially vulnerable and candid when he describes how he buried his best friend in Iraq and resolved that we don't need to lose lives defending sea access lanes so that we can burn oil when we don't need oil. One vignette I want to share with you that's not in the book is I was talking with a reviewer, and she told me that every night she reads typically 2, sometimes 3 pages to her daughter, and they discuss the subject because there's a lot of fear and anger, I think, among youth, and I haven't fixed this problem. And so for them to understand it and to feel empowered, the book is fundamentally a hopeful book. The balance I'm trying to strike is not to be overly optimistic. There's no silver bullets here. I want to be grounded in realism and pragmatism, but we can be very hopeful at the same time.
I love your reference to Lynn. I had the pleasure of working with her in an M&A context, and one of the components of leadership that I think you bring out in the book very beautifully is that this innovator mind, from the very early stages of Beyond Meat to the very large endeavors that Lynn and her co-founder undertook in the market, that there's a lot to cultivate there. And I'm particularly impressed and glad that we now have so many different examples of different ways to lead in this arena. So thank you for putting real people and their real bravery and some of their struggles into fine print, so to speak, so that we can share. And this is a more personal human journey than is some of the rhetoric that we read without much discipline or specificity. So thank you for all of that. I bet the interviews were fascinating.
There's a great set of resources in the back of the book, including a bibliography of, I think, some recommended readings, a listing of all investors. What other resources have we got? Full disclosure, a number of these companies I've invested in, so I let that be clear. But
let a good conflict get in the way of anything, John.
Well, I'm expecting we'll update this book annually, and it's more than a book, it's a platform. So there's a website, and we intend to track the world's progress, the best examples, create community around this. I've started work on a version of it for India and another one for China with prominent co-authors and stories from those parts of the world. I've tried to make it a global book, and it's a global problem, to be sure. But
you have a lot of references in your work to the pandemic and lessons that we have learned or should be more keen to observe around the constructs of global consciousness. And I wonder if you could speak to us a little bit about the parallels that you're drawing that we can learn from real time as we continue to work with the pandemic.
Well, the parallels are eerie. The scientists have told us for a long time that there was some probability of a pandemic. They've told us for some time that it's certain we will have a climate crisis. And we didn't listen to either of the two of them. We're listening now, finally, to the climate crisis. I think I had hoped at one point in the pandemic that the world would reach a kind of herd immunity through vaccines and the spread of the virus. That looks unlikely to me now due to uneven leadership on the part of important institutions and individuals, due to inequitable resources, underinvestment in public health and in our medical institutions, due to misinformation about vaccines. We're seeing that in terms of the climate as well. And so I think the lessons are large, and the problem of the climate crisis is greater by far than the problem of the pandemic. One more thing, I think climate is fundamentally an amplifier of inequities. And so we see the rich world able to get vaccines, and the developing world is second behind it. The rich world will be able to cope with the devastation of the climate crisis more readily than the developing world. And so I think there's many parallels and lessons to be learned. And I don't wish a pandemic on anyone. I don't wish wildfires on any community. But the sooner the world understands and we make progress on this plan, we achieve this plan so that the climate crisis truly becomes a top 2 voting issue in the top 20 emitting nations. We call to do that by 2025. We'll be in better shape. My friend Al Gore likes to say political will is a renewable resource, but it's very unevenly distributed around the world. Greta Thunberg's, she was a 16-year-old teenager, I think, in 2018, maybe 15, when she was a lone student striking school on Fridays. A year later, she'd catalyzed a 1 million-person demonstration in 100 different cities. And I talk about turning movements into action. Protests, and I'm a proponent of civil disobedience, but protests alone will not get us where we need to go. We need to train those on what she accomplished in Europe, which was to make climate the top 2 voting issue there. Greta has not achieved that in the US. No one has. You don't vote in China, so you have different tactics to get technical assistance to move the leadership. But this is a really wonderful problem. This is a great thing for your community, of people who care about governance and leadership and society, to say, I'm gonna pick one of these key results and I'm gonna go to work on it with my community. I really wrote this book for the leader inside everyone, not for the reader, but for the leader, because individual virtue is necessary and expected, but it's not going to get us where we need to go. We got to do more than install LED light bulbs. We got to change the laws or change the lawmakers. We've got to act in a community to get the school district to adopt electric buses. We need, as employees of organizations, to push our organizations to both make and meet their commitments to net zero. That's the way we'll get ourselves out of this fix.
Well, you tackled a lot. I'm sure in all of our lives, the voices that we use in our everyday roles as leaders in governance and in the rooms with the most money and the most influence, we can all be better warriors. And the most important part of the book to me, John, was just how human it was and how it balanced both responsibility with optimism. So thank you for sharing your story with us today, calling us to the new and the now, and we will look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. My favorite quote from the book is the last line, and that's the interview with Paul Jobs, where she says, "The climate crisis should be looked at as one of the greatest opportunities that's ever been presented to humankind." And I think that says it very well. Another book that does a great job on the human dimensions of this is an incredible set of essays called All We Can Save, all written and edited by women, to no surprise. Thank you. And you can get copies of this poster, the whole plan, for free at speedandscale.com. So I'd love to get feedback from your audience. I'm John at speedandscale.com. Thank you.